Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go over with y'all on how to do a BTRFS setup on Ubuntu Server. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to give you a quick look at the hardware I'm using. So, if you look here, we're going to be doing a RAID 1 on these two 512 gigabyte drives. And we're going to go ahead and do a RAID 10 on 10 2 terabyte drives that are 3.5 inch. Quick note too, whenever you're doing a setup like this on R720XD, make sure you're using two 2.5 inch drives in the middle two bays right here. If you populate all the bays with 3.5 inch drives, it will start overheating drastically. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on here to the USB creation part. If you go look right here, this is the link you're going to want to go ahead and navigate down to. It's also at the bottom of my banner. Once you get to this link, you're going to want to go ahead and scroll down to Ubuntu 20.04.2 live server AMD 64.iso. You're going to download this image. So download it, save it somewhere, and after you do that part, go ahead and open up your USB creation tool and navigate to that ISO you downloaded, and just go ahead and start. When I ask you ISO or DD, it doesn't really matter. I prefer DD for Linux stuff. And then you're going to go ahead and wait for that to finish. Okay, so now that our USB is done, let's go ahead and move on to the USB insertion and the posting of the server. So I'm going to go over here and plug in that USB real quick. Okay, so let's go ahead and get my iDRAC pulled up here so we can go ahead and console into it for the booting process. And I'm going to go ahead and launch my console here now. Now I always recommend using the HTML based console. It just seems to be a lot less buggy than the Java one in general, especially with Linux. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and push F11 for my boot manager. Now I'm going to go ahead and click on my BIOS-based boot menu. And to make this easier for y'all can just, follow me along as I'm doing the process. And I'm going to choose that USB we created with Rufus here. An important note too, just ignore the errors you're seeing there. That's just because I was playing around with the BTRFS arrays before I actually made this tutorial. So, an important note here that's actually really important. Ubuntu Server does a few operations, oddly enough, even the NTFS file system. I'm not sure all the operations it does during boot, but it does do some things. I don't know exactly what it does. If somebody had some more info on the situation, I'd greatly appreciate it because I'd like to know myself. But when you're booting to the USB, I was booting to a computer with an NTFS based drive in it that had Windows 10 on it, and it actually scanned the drive and repaired the NTFS file system because of an incorrect boot, or just made some adjustments, which I thought that was interesting because I didn't tell it to do that. But the Ubuntu Server USB is doing some things while it's booting. I'm not sure why. Anyway, I found that really interesting. So there is some operations they're doing. I would personally like to know what else they're doing when it's booting. Like I said, if y'all have any information on that, please let me know. But I can confirm that it is doing a few operations. during post. Maybe even some that you may not want to be happening, so just a fair warning for y'all. Okay, as you can see here, we are now to the Ubuntu Server Setup Installation GUI, or Graphic User Interface. So now that we're here, we're going to go ahead and press F2 to drop into the shell. And I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that box down in the corner that I substituted for my face. So check you off, that way y'all can see the commands going on here. So there's going to be a few things we got to do first. So first things first, we need to go ahead and issue the IP adder command. This is going to give us the IP address we need for the SSH login. Just take note of that IP. That's the one we're obviously going to be using. Then we're going to need to issue the passwd command and set a password for the SSH login. So I'll be doing that right now. And then we're going to need to go ahead and navigate to etc ssh sshd the sshd config file. Now these are usually commented out, so you're going to want to uncomment these 4 lines right here, and then you want to uncomment the permit root login, delete the prohibit password, and type in yes right here. And after you do that, just go ahead and save your buffer. And then next thing you want to go ahead and do is issue the systemctl command. So systemctl restart sshd. Okay, let's go ahead and get on our primary machine here, or whatever I'll use to do most of y'all's computing, and we're going to go ahead and SSH into the system we're setting up BTRFS and Ubuntu Server on. Okay, and we're in. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to the creation of the BTRFS partitions. So I will go ahead and explain these commands I have over on the right hand side. It's good to actually do this on a notepad or like a Sublime text editor, just whatever you want to use, Notepad++. So I will go ahead and go through the commands I set up, and I did them in order here, that way I just copy and paste them in the terminal. So the first one here is we're creating a legacy-based partition scheme layout, and then we're creating the boot partition on that partition layout. Then we're creating a swap partition, and then we're creating a root partition using the rest of the space left over on the drive and starting at the 10 GB mark. After that, we're creating the swap file system on the swap partition we made. And then we're activating that swap file system on the swap partition. Next, we're creating the BTRFS file system for the boot partition. Now, grub is compatible with booting to BTRFS as long as you're using a newer version of grub and it's not a partitionless setup. And then we're making a BTRFS file system for the root partition, which is our main file system. We're making that file system across those two 512 gig drives, and same with that boot partition up here. They're being done on the 512 gigabyte drives. Now right here we're doing a partitionless BTRFS setup. So as you can see, if you look up, we're not doing any of the partition table creation steps. We're just creating a straight BTRFS file system for that entire data store, which would be those 10 2 terabyte drives that you saw at the start of the video. And then last but not least, I like to set boot, and I like that to be the last thing I do. So just a preference. So let's go ahead and start copying and pasting these commands here. Okay, and now we're making a RAID array for those 10 2TB drives that you saw at the beginning of the video. Now, what's different about this one right here is this is using a partitionless BTRFS setup, so we're not having to do any of the partition table setup or the partition creation. We're just creating a BTRFS file system right on top of the drive, so it's technically partitionless, and this is the perfect example of actually when to use that, because the OS is not going to be directly on this drive. And we'll go ahead and set boot here, just because I like to do that last. And then let's go ahead and confirm that everything was created correctly. So BTRFS file system show. There's our 1 TB boot partition. There's the root partition with the remaining space. And here's the 10 2TB drives. So just make sure that you look this over correctly, because this is just one of the most important steps of setting up your server. Now on to mounting. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and type in fdisk-list. I'm going to go ahead and locate those 512 GB drives. So SDA and STC, so I can use any one of those for the BTRFS mount. So what I'm going to go ahead and do here is I'm going to go ahead and type in mkdir mnt and then type in OS drive. And I'm going to proceed to mount the hard drive. And we are mounted. Now what we need to go ahead and do is we need to go ahead and copy all the files that the installer puts on the hard drive automatically through the GUI based installer. But we're going to have to do this manually because of the BTRFS creation steps we took. So in order to do that, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go cd/ to confirm we're in the root directory and type ls. And you're going to see a folder called ROFS, which means read only file system. So what you're going to go ahead and do is you're on cd ROFS. Now we're in that directory. Now type ls again. Now you're going to see there's some sym links, but this is what we're going to use as the for the base of the operating system, are all these files right here. So now to copy the file system base over the BTRFS RAID. Okay, so we have everything copied over. Now we're going to go ahead and do a chroot into that directory. So in order to do that, we're going to go ahead and type cd mnt os drive. Just going to do ls to confirm everything's in here. I don't see the sym links. Everything looks good. And let me clear it out. So I'm going to go ahead and type in mount type proc/proc mnt os drive proc. Mounted our process folder. Now let's go ahead and type mount rbind sys mnt os drive sys. Mount the sys folder. Arrow up. Change sys to dev. For mounting the device folders and the devices. And then mount make r slave mnt os drive dev, and then sys. Okay, so what we did here is we did the preparations for chroot. So we mounted the processes, the sys, and the dev folders, and then we made those R slaves. So here's the commands I typed, just so that tab out doesn't confuse y'all. And where I did the tab out on this one, it's this command here, so skip those lines, and this one, mount make R slave mnt os drive sys. Now chroot, so chroot mnt os drive, and then /bin/bash, and then we're gonna go ahead and source the profile. So source etc profile. Some of this you don't have to do depending on what distros you're working with, but this is the Gentoo standardized way, and this way you're not missing anything. In my opinion, it's the safer way. Make sure you're getting everything here. Like a lot of times, you might not have to source the profile, or you might not have to type bin bash after you chroot that location, but we're doing all those just in case. Okay, so now all the commands I type are associated with the files we copied onto those 512 gigabyte drives that are BTRFS RAID array. So now that we are in our chroot and I've cleared the screen, I'm going to go ahead and mount the boot partition. So I'm going to go ahead and type mount dev sdc1/boot. And we're mounted. Now you're going to want to make sure you issue that command after you're in chroot. That way when you're installing the kernels or working with the initramfs or the grub configuration, it knows to work with the boot directory. So now a lot of time when you're doing this method and after the chroot, a lot of times you have a problem with your DNS or your internet. So in order to fix that, we're going to manually set the name servers here for the DNS. So we're going to go ahead and type in nano etc resolve, tab it out, conf, enter. And as long as you're connected to the internet, you don't have any specific firewall settings, the easiest way I think to do this is to go ahead and just type name server 8.8.8.8, which is the Google's default. And so if they change it from the time you see this video, you're going to want to make sure you get a different name server. Or you just check your DNS route and grab your ISP ones, usually using the closest ISP DNS for your provider is usually gets you the best ping. Okay, so now that we got all the files copied over and we have our DNS name server set, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and do an app update to update the app repository list. And now we're going to go ahead and do an app upgrade to ensure all the packages are upgraded. Okay, so I've already done the app update and app upgrade. So as you can see, it didn't find any updates for the repository list, and it didn't find any package upgrades available. So for y'all, it will do. It will find some upgrades it needs to do, and the process might take 5 or 10 minutes. After that finishes, what you're going to want to do is you're going to do app install aptitude. And the reason you're going to want to go ahead and install aptitude is because we're going to use that to reinstall all the packages on the Ubuntu server installation that we're chrooted into that we copied over from the read-only file system to the BTRFS RAID. And the reason we're doing that is a few of those symlinks might not be copied over correctly because we use the cp-a command to copy all those files from the ROFS folder onto the BTRFS RAID. So I went ahead and cleared all that stuff on the screen. So now we're going to go ahead and do, since we have aptitude installed, we're going to type in aptitude reinstall quote squiggly line I quote, and then we're going to hit enter. And what this is just going to do is this is going to go ahead and reinstall all the packages that are on the system to confirm that those symlinks are correctly relinked. And this is just a good procedure to do after you copy over all those files onto the BTRFS RAID. For the simple fact is we're not using the GUI based installer, we're actually copying over the base files from the read-only file system folder on the Ubuntu Server USB. So this just ensure that everything is installed correctly now in our chroot environment. And so because this process is going to take a while, I'm just going to go ahead and pause it here, and then we'll resume once this process is finished. Okay, so now what we're going to do before we proceed to the fstab file setup, we're going to go ahead and create the trueroot mount points for both the 512 gigabyte drives and the 2 terabyte drives, and we're also going to create just a general mount point for the 2 terabyte drives. So to go ahead and do that, we're going to type in mkdir mnt trueroot. Then we're going to create another directory, mkdir mnt datastore, and then mkdir mnt datastore trueroot. So let me go ahead and explain what we just did here. So the trueroot is for the to mount the subvolume ID of 0 for BTRFS and those 512 gigabyte drives. We're going to be mounting that subvolume of 0 under trueroot. The datastore is the mount point for the 2 terabyte drives, and the datastore trueroot is the mount point for subvolume 0 for the 2 terabyte drives. Now the subvolume 0 is the lowest mount point. It's the actual trueroot of the BTRFS RAIDs, and you need this for when you're doing snapshots. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and proceed with the fstab setup right now. This is a good trick to do, especially if you're not doing it through an SSH session to copy and paste commands. So you can go ahead and type in blkid and then forward it over to etc fstab. And then we're going to issue the and command. That way, whenever that command finishes successfully, we're going to go ahead and open it with nano. Okay, so let me go ahead and explain what I did here. So I went ahead and used the blkid command to go ahead and collect all the UIDs from all my drives and partitions, and then I outputted that data over to my fstab file. And then I used nano to open up the fstab file. And now I'm going to go ahead and clear out the data in here that I no longer need. So I'm going to be keeping SDA 1 through 3. And I'm going to go ahead and be keeping the swap partition of SDJ2. And the reason for that is because when you're mounting swap partitions, you can mount more than one swap partition, and it pools those swap partitions into one swap space. And so to keep everything unified, we're using 10 gigabytes of swap from one of my 512 gigabyte drives and another 10 gigabytes of swap from my other 512 gigabyte drive. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and comment some lines. So for this line is going to be mount boot. Next line is going to be mount swaps. Third line is going to be mount root. and then mount trueroot, and then mount BTRFS data pool. And BTRFS data pool is going to be those 10 2TB drives. And then mount BTRFS data pool trueroot. And after we're done creating this file, I'll go ahead and explain everything to y'all. So SDA1 is going to be my boot partition, so Control 6. So we're going to go ahead and do here is Control K on dev SDA1 because that's our boot partition. And we'll go ahead and go to boot and get Control U. And now we're going to go ahead and put our two swap partitions under the mount swap comment lines. So do that. SDA2, Control K, go to swaps, and then Control U. Then we're going to go ahead and go down again to SDJ2, Control K, and then go to the mount swaps comment line, render SDA2, Control U. And now we're going to go to our primary root partition for the OS, Control K, and then Control U. And for me, dev SDI is already in the correct place. And we're also going to need that UUID for the mount BTRFS data pool. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and do Alt 6 on this line, and then Control U. Wait, we copied that line. And I also need the UUID for the primary root partition, and I need to copy that line and put it under the true root as well. So Alt 6, Alt 6, Control U. Oops, I didn't do that one right. So Alt 6, Control U. And now let's go ahead and clear out the junk we don't need from these UUIDs. So we finished cleaning up the fstab file and we only left the UIDs we're going to work with. Now we're going to go ahead and finish off adding the correct columns to those UIDs. So for the boot partition, I'm going to go ahead and mount it at the boot mount point. Do a few spaces here. And it is the BTRFS file system type. Going to be using defaults. Few spaces here. Not going to be specifying any backup options here, so 0 here. And it's not the root file system, but we're just going to go ahead and enable the scan option. Just for the heck of it. Now let's go over to the swaps partitions. Few spaces here. The swaps don't have a mount point, so we're going to put none. Few spaces here. File system type is swap. Options for that file system, SW for swap. No backup options and no file system scanning. Same thing for this line. This one's going to have a root mount point, so / file system type BTRFS. Same thing here, defaults. No backup options. And for file system scanning, we're going to have a 1 here because it is the root partition, so you have to have a 1 instead of a 2. Now the BTRFS trueroot. This is where things get a little bit tricky, but I'll explain them to you as we go. It's pretty much going to be the same thing, except for the options. We're going to add a subvolume ID of 0 to specify, hey, that's the lowest mount point for the BTRFS file system. That is trueroot itself. So for the mount point, we're going to go ahead and do / mnt. And we're going to specify that trueroot folder we created under the mount directory. So trueroot. Few spaces here. We're going to be using the default options. And we're also going to be using a subvolume option. So subvolume ID equals 0. And we're doing that because we're saying that's trueroot for those two 512 gigabyte drives. And we're going to do a 0 and a 0 here. Now for the BTRFS data store, I accidentally put data pool here. Let's make that comment line match the mount points, that way y'all don't get confused. Sorry about that. So mnt data store. These spaces, defaults, other options, 0 and 0. and then t datastore trueroot. Default options. Okay, now we have our fstab file ready to go. Let's go ahead and clean this up a little bit so we can actually see that the columns match and that they're aligned correctly. Then we'll go over everything to make sure it's all correct. Okay, so now we cleaned up the fstab file. Let's double check everything. So we have the boot UUID mounted on the boot directory under the root as a BTRFS file system using the default options with a 0 for the backup options. Backup options aren't used that often anymore, so these are usually 0 all the time. And a 2 for a file system check. Now, I don't know how BTRFS handles this column, but in a lot of distros you still have to use the Ubuntu FS to configure this with the file system scanning anyway. So, and the newer BTRFS versions might handle this. So I don't know how BTRFS handles this last column here on between new and older versions, but we're going to go ahead and enable those file system scanning options anyway. Now on mount swaps, swaps don't have mount points. We're using swap file system types. For the options, we're just telling it to use swap options. 0 and 0. Those two are correct. Mount root. It's the UUID for the root partition, which was dev SDA3 for me. Mount at the root mount point. BTRFS file system type using defaults options. 0 and a 1. That line's correct. Trueroot which is still going to be the same UUID. MNT at the true root mount point. Defaults subvolume ID equals 0. That's correct. 0 and 0. And mount at BTRFS datastore. Defaults. Sub. Volume ID equals 0. Okay, so everything looks good in our fstab file. Let's go ahead and save that modified buffer and clear it out. Okay, so now that we've cleared that screen out, we're going to go ahead and type in apt install grub2. Yes. So now what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and issue the grub install command, and we're going to go ahead and do that for both of the 512 gigabyte drives. The reason why is because this is writing some data, the first few sectors of the hard drive, that are going to be independent from our BTRFS partition. This is also why whenever you're creating the partitions using parted, you want to leave 2 to like 4 megabytes or 1 to 4 megabytes of space unallocated on the very start of your drive. So let's go ahead and issue that command now for those two drives. So we're going to do grub install dev SDA. Installed correctly. And then we're going to do grub install dev SDJ. And the reason why we installed it to both those 512 gigabyte drives instead of just one, like I said, is because those initial few sectors that grub is writing to let the motherboard know when you attempt to boot to that drive that, hey, grub's on here, then boot to this partition. This is a safety in case one of those drives dies. So if one of those 512 gigabyte drives die and you had your motherboard set to boot to that drive via legacy / DOS, then you're just going to be able to go back into your motherboard options and change the boot drive from your failed drive to the other drive. This way you'll still be able to boot, although you might have to enable a degraded mode to boot into the BTRFS under a degraded array. Under a degraded RAID array. And let's go ahead and make sure we set a password for the root account. Also, for the Ubuntu Server installation, make sure when you're setting the password you type it in slowly. You will get an error if you try to input both passwords too fast, regardless if they match or not. And now we're going to go ahead and proceed with the installation of the kernel. And to do that, we're going to type in apt install Linux-image-generic. And we're going to confirm that. Now, as you can see, it's installing the Linux-firmware package right here as a dependency, and it's also installing the Linux modules for the kernel as a dependency. An important note is if you're installing a different kernel besides the generic kernel image, there's a chance those modules and that firmware might not be installed as dependencies, so you're going to want to do that as a separate process. And as you can see here, it is automatically generating an initramfs, and I believe it's also going to issue the update grub command as well. And because of that, as long as you're installing the Linux image generic package, it installed those as dependencies and also issued those commands automatically. So as long as you have your fstab file set up, you should just be able to reboot, and it will reboot directly into your operating system. Okay, so we are booting into our Ubuntu Server installation that we finished here. Now keep in mind we didn't install a window manager and we didn't install a desktop environment or anything, so it's going to take a little while to load because the systemd init is not properly configured. So it's going to take a little longer to load, and when it does load, you're going to see a blinking cursor at the top, and it's probably just going to sit like that. All you got to go ahead and do to bring in the login prompt is change your TTY by pressing Control Alt and F2 or F3, etc. Okay, here's that blinking cursor I was talking about. Go ahead and open up my keyboard here and do a Control Alt F2. Okay, now it brought up the login screen. Sometimes it won't work right when the blinking cursor appears. You're gonna have to wait a little longer. Like I said, first boot, especially when systemd is not configured correctly in your init system. So like I said, it takes a while. So let's go ahead and log in here. And I'm going to go ahead and configure my SSH so I can copy and paste my BTRFS Snapit script. I'm not going to have this in the tutorial because y'all obviously already know how to do that for the most part. And if you don't, I will have a tutorial later on explaining how to configure and install SSH on Ubuntu or Ubuntu Server. Choose your distro. I'm going to try to get the tutorials up as quick as I can. I usually try to do 1 to 2 videos a week. And if time allows me and financials, I will be doing a lot more of them. So what you're going to want to go ahead and do after that's done is you're going to want to go ahead and go into your mount directory, so cd mnt, and type the ls command. So you should have some directories here according to earlier on in my tutorial. So for me, the directories I have are datastore, trueroot, and trueroot. So if your fstab file is set up correctly, then your BTRFS RAID arrays are going to be mounted to these folders right here. And you want to make sure they're mounted to these folders before you make any new directories in them. So let's go ahead and make our snapshots directory. So I'm going to go on with y'all on how to do a quick snapshot script. That way you just type in Snapit, and it will go ahead and snapshot all your BTRFS RAID arrays and place a snapshot with the name of the date and time and whatever else you type in the command line. Now, if you notice, we're doing snapshots without creating the subvolume directories first to install the OS on. Instead, we're just installing the OS in the top level trueroot directory. And a lot of people want to know how to do this. Well, this is how you do it. This is actually how I do it by default. So anyway, enough small talk. Let's go ahead and go into the trueroot mkdir snapshots. Back out of that. Then we're going to go cd datastore trueroot mkdir snapshots. Okay, now we're ready to create the Snapit script. And Snapit is the phrase I coined for it. This is just a tiny little kitty script I made to just make snapshots really, really easy, and it makes them as a read-only snapshot. That way, if you're running as root and you do anything stupid like rm star, force, or anything like that, enter, it might wipe out your OS, but you'll still have your snapshots, and you'll be able to boot to those snapshots if you wipe out your BTRFS directory. So we're going to go ahead and go to the bin folder, so cd/bin, then we're going to do nano, and we're going to type in Snapit. And I'm going to paste my kitty script in here. So if you look, it will just say timestamp equals date, year, month, day, and then HMS for hours, months, seconds. So whenever you type Snapit, it's going to create a BTRFS subvolume snapshot of your root and of your MNT data store, or whatever you named it, or if you set up those data store partitions or not. This is for if you have more than one BTRFS partition, or just for a single BTRFS partition. So usually by industry standard, whenever you do the subvolumes, you create one for your home, or you can do one for your var, etc., etc. This is just my way of doing it. I think it's simpler. I think it works better, and it just seems, to me, it just seems overall like a much better way of doing things. And I've been using BTRFS for a while. I've used it on multiple computers. I've used it in production environments. I've done a lot of testing with it. I've purposely broken the BTRFS RAID probably like 30 times testing it, and I've even had a shorted drive and completely crashed a RAID array to see if I could recover it. Well, it wasn't 100% on purpose. And there are plenty of commands to recover BTRFS RAID arrays. You have to do something really bad, like shred half the array for you not to be able to get back your files. So, yeah, I love BTRFS. To me, it's great. So, best thing since sliced bread. And it's just how I've come up with doing things over the time that I've used it. So, I mean, it's just simpler. So yeah, anyway, I don't like to install the operating system to anything other than the top level tree root. And back in 11.04 Natty, there was some problems with BTRFS if you installed the operating system to anything other than the top level tree root. In fact, it would break Ubuntu's layout. So now this is obviously not the case anymore, but this is just one of the things I'm using to back up one of the points I'm saying, is that it simplifies the process. And I just personally think the OS should be in the top level. That's just me personally. And it's nice because you don't have to create all the sub-volume folders for home, boot, or whatever you want to do. It just makes things easier. If you set it up like this and you just create this little tiny script right here, snap it, one command, it covers everything. So it's just to me, it's just a lot easier way of doing it. So anyway, just take note of this little script right here. It will be in the video description down below, so y'all can just paste this into your Snapit file under your bin. So anyway, I'm going to exit out of here and save it. And now, as long as you created those two snapshot directories, you can go ahead and take a snapshot. Like I said, you want to make sure you're booted into the OS first before you create those directories, and you want to make sure your BTRFS file systems are correctly mounted on those directories you made in your fstab file before you create the snapshot directories. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to mount because there's something in the fault. Y'all know how it is. I'm sure you have plenty of experience with Linux if you're even looking at this video. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and test that command, but first, chmod +x snapit. And let's go ahead and test it. Snapit. And there we go. We've created the snapshots. All I did was type in Snapit. As you can see, create read-only snapshot of your root, create read-only snapshot of your MNT data store, and you can see they are created just fine. Okay, so now that we've created the Snapit script and we've taken some snapshots, okay, so let's get into this. Let's go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and cd mnt, and I'm going to go to my trueroot folder. And I'm going to go ahead and do an ls right here. So as you can see, the trueroot folder is subvolume ID 0 or subvolume ID 5. They're both the same thing. The BTRFS man pages says that 0 can be used as an alias for subvolume ID 5. So 0 and 5 are essentially the exact same thing. You can type 0 in your fstab or 5 in your fstab. I like to do 0 because I guess I'm just paranoid. So as you can see, we took a snapshot. It took a snapshot of the subvolume ID 0 or 5. And as you can see, we have a snapshots directory in our root. So whenever we take a snapshot, it's going to snapshot our entire root, but it's not going to snapshot that snapshot folder. So you don't have to worry about that. Now what you are going to notice is when you go into the snapshots folder that's in the root of the snapshot, you're going to be going into that snapshots folder that's in another snapshots folder, and it kind of mirrors itself, but it's not doing that with your storage. So don't worry about that. And BTRFS knows that there's snapshots here. So when you're taking a snapshot, don't worry, you're safe. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. CD snapshots. Okay, and as you can see, here's the snapshots we took right here. We'll go ahead and CD into boot test and ls, and as you can see, we're in the snapshot of boot test, and then there's another snapshots folder. So if we go into snapshots again and do an ls, you'll see, hey, the other snapshots are there, but the boot test snapshot is not there. So that's just kind of something I was showing y'all, that they're not mirroring each other, but in a way they are. So I was just showing you that because the snapshot I'm in is missing that stop, but the snapshot... Anyway, y'all get the point. I'm not going to ramble on too much about this. Y'all understand now, though. I was just showing you that folder's not there. Okay, anyway. So, now that y'all know how that works, whenever you take the snapshots, even though you installed the OS to the subvolume 5, you can do it like this. And you can take snapshots, and it works just fine, and you have nothing to worry about. And the reason I do it like this, because it makes things a lot simpler with scripts, and when you want to use that little Snapit kitty script thing I made, it just makes things easier. This is the way I prefer to do it. So, now that we've gone over that, and you see the snapshots are working, everything's fine, we're going to go into one of the great reasons I like BTRFS and why this is absolutely golden, especially when you're using it for dev work. It's just great because you can absolutely destroy your entire operating system on purpose, and you have absolutely nothing to worry about, and you can boot right into a snapshot really, really easy. And you can even simplify this more by making your own script. So I'm going to go ahead and show you all how to do that right now. And I will be making a video later on how to recover broken BTRFS RAID arrays. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and type in BTRFS, tab it out, subvolume, tab it out, and I'm going to type in set default. Now, when you type in the set default command, what that's doing is that is telling the operating system that you want to use that subvolume or that snapshot to be your primary one. So next time you post or boot, you're going to be booting to the one you set as default, and you're going to be in there. So if I want to boot into the boot test snapshot, it's a snapshot that I made for showing you all this before. So if I want to boot into that, it's type set default. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is I just want to type the directory location of that snapshot. So boot test, set default, boot test. And as you can see, it's done. So when I issue a reboot command, it's going to go ahead and boot into this folder, this boot test folder, or the snapshot. And now to confirm that that is set as default, what we can do is we can type in BTRFS subvolume get default. And now you're going to have to type in a / for your root directory. And as you can see, ID 265. Okay, so your top level subvolume is ID 0 or ID level 5, but BTRFS is always going to show you ID subvolume level 5 for the top of the tree root. So in order to set back to your primary tree root, or the very root of your BTRFS, where you've installed the OS on, the tree root, the top level, the creme de la creme, whatever you want to call it. It's a little different because you don't have actual location to point to, because that's your tree root, so you actually have to specify the ID level. So now when you want to go revert back, what you're going to do is you're going to type in BTRFS set default 5 and then a /. Oh. Oops, hold on, I messed it up. I forgot the subvolume. Okay, BTRFS subvolume set default 5 and then /. And then I'm going to hit enter. As you can see, it took it. And now I'm going to go ahead and type BTRFS subvolume get default /. Now you can see it's back to saying ID 5 FS tree, your top level, your creme de la creme. So I hope that helps y'all to understand how great BTRFS is and some of the advantages of installing the OS to your tree root, and how you can still take snapshots. And a lot of people are posting on Google and forums and Reddit, how do you use BTRFS without creating the subvolume folders? And this is how you do it. And this is how you take the snapshots. It just confuses people a lot because the snapshots are in the same area that you're taking the snapshot in. It's mirroring it, but it's not mirroring it, because you saw when I went to the snapshots folder, all the snapshots are in the snapshots, but the snapshot you're in is not in the snapshot. So don't go too far on that one, because you might go down the hole. But you get the idea. Yeah, and it's great. So you can boot in your OS, and then you can create a script where, like, you know, if you're, let's see, you're doing developer work and you want to play around with the core of the operating system, you can create a script so it takes a snapshot and then it boots in that snapshot you just took right away. This is the method for how I do it. I do this on Gentoo, I do it on Ubuntu Server, and a few other distros, and this is the way that works for me, and it works great, and it's simplified, and it helps you wrap your head around the snapshots and get more experience with BTRFS. And you don't have to download any of their extra software packages to take or manage the snapshots, because you made that simple Snapit script. So as you can see, it makes things a lot easier. It's real easy. And most guides will tell you to go ahead and create the snapshot directories. I just like to snapshot the whole thing, and I like my OS to be in the top level directory with the snapshots right there. And this is how I do it. It just simplifies things for me whenever I set people up. Whenever I'm setting up a server for somebody in a production environment, this is how I do it. So anyway, that's it. Anyway, I hope y'all liked the video. If y'all do, like and subscribe.